Hello everybody. Today I'm with Matthew Thornhill. He is from our London labs. He's a lead developer in our Cloud Pak for AIOps. And today we are going to introduce you to the new feature which has been introduced in the Cloud Pak for AIOps version 4.10.1. And this is about creating incidents based on multiple alert criteria. So we've done incidents in the past, but we have enhanced that greatly. From an agenda perspective, this is rather short. So we are going to point you towards the blog of Matt, and he's going to demo what is an incident, and then he's going to how is this triggered. So you need to create a trigger policy which escalates a number of events into an incident. And then we are going to talk about what is the new piece that we have released in this version. Just a short hint, this is about JSONata. I hope you're familiar with that standard. Then we are going to conclude the whole thing, and I'm going to point you towards the documentation to get you reading. So with that, I hope everybody is excited about the new feature, and over to you, Matt.
Today I'm going to show a couple of new capabilities we've introduced in IBM Cloud Pak for AIOps version 4.10.1 relating to incident creation. Now, before I dive into the new capabilities, first a bit of a recap on what an incident is in AIOps and how they're currently formed. So incidents are generally there to represent something that requires immediate resolution and is currently affecting your key business. What we have here is an example of such an incident. In this case, there is a ping failure against some ticket booking website, and in this scenario, that is the main area that this organization is interacting with customers. So this is where customers go to buy tickets. If that's down, that's really bad. They need to be able to try and fix it very quickly. So in this case, they've chosen that incidents should be raised for that kind of problem. And AIOps has gathered all the different context about that holistic issue. It's presented what it thinks are the highest or most likely probable cause of the problem. And it's given them lots of different bits of information to try and help resolve the problem. If we drill into the alerts, we can see that an incident is underlaid by various different alerts that capture different parts of the issue. And this is our whole holistic problems. In this case, we've got a high rate of transmission errors on some network ports somewhere. That's causing a cascade of failures where certain services are falling over, disks are running out of space, and then ultimately that ticket booking website is going down. Now, these different alerts on their own are not necessarily something they want to be able to create an incident for. Like if there's a single network port down somewhere, you might not need to wake people up in the middle of the night or raise a ticket. It could just be something that could be fixed in the future. However, if the ticket booking website's down and it's currently affecting their customers, then an incident needs to be raised. And we can see this reflected here that the ping failure on that ticket booking website is a trigger alert. So that means that someone has created an incident policy that matches that kind of alert and says that we should create an incident whenever that alert occurs. And then as part of AIOps' capabilities, it's automatically going to bring along all of the other alerts that are related to it that share a cause. So in this case, they wanted to create an incident based on that ticket booking website. It's created the incident and it's brought along those other alerts. And in previous versions, you could always choose an alert that is of interest, one that's an indicator of an incident requiring problem, and that will go off and create an incident for you. But there was no way of saying, I need multiple different alerts to occur before an incident should be created. So let's dive into that in a little bit more detail. Let's take a different scenario. You're an internet service provider. You're providing internet services to your end customers. If a single router goes down, that's not necessarily that interesting. You don't want to raise an incident for it. It could just be a customer's unplugged the router. They might have a power cut or some other problem. Let's say two routers go down. Again, it's likely that you could have two customers have unplugged at the same time. Again, it's not something you want to raise an incident for. However, if you have 5 customers all around the same time have their routers go offline, they lose connection to the internet, and there's some kind of incident in the local exchange, and also Cloud Pak for AIOps has found that all of those different problems are related to each other, that's when you want to raise an incident. And there's no kind of one of those alerts that indicates the whole holistic problem. You need to know that all of those alerts have occurred, all of those different problem areas, all those different routers have happened before you have enough information to know that you want to raise that incident. And that's where some of the new capabilities in 4.10.1 come in. So if we go over to the policy page and go and create a new incident creation policy, we'll now find that there are some additional properties that you can use in here. So where previously you had a single condition that would match that single alert, like that ping failure we saw earlier, now you can create what we call alert sets. And this is describing a set of alerts that need to co-occur with each other and get grouped as sharing a cause within AIOps and allow you to do this kind of cross alert conditions. So let's kind of come up with a kind of basic example here for what we were just talking about. So like what we're talking about where we have various different end user routers and we only want to raise an incident once a number of those go down, and we also have some problem with the exchange. We can start forming an alert set. We have alert conditions, we can name those if we want to. And very similar to before, we have that kind of easy to use builder where you can start selecting properties of the alert. I'm just going to keep it simple here and say, all right, if the summary contains end user router, of course, in a real world scenario, you might want to make this a little bit more generic or kind of more specific, but let's just go with that for now. So we've got the kind of end user router alerts, and we want to have at least 5 of those before we raise an incident. And then we also want to capture that other condition that it also needs to be related to a problem in the exchange. And again, simple example here of property matching, but of course you could choose from any of the properties you have in your alert in order to make the determination about the things you want to match. So let's just do exchange. And what this is going to do is if we only get one of these alerts, that end user router going down, they probably just unplugged it, no incident's going to get raised. However, once we get 5 of those and Cloud Pak for AIOps detects they're all related to each other, they all share a cause with each other, and we also get one of those exchange alerts, we will then go off and create the incident according to the settings down here. And the creation works just the same as before. It's more about these new criteria that you can set. So this can be really powerful. There's lots of other scenarios you can think of where basically the decision of should I raise an incident or not, or what priority it should have, is based on multiple different alerts that occur within that correlated group. So that's the first new capability we've added, which is that more complex ability to kind of cut across those different alerts and form an incident based on them. The second capability we've added within context of incident creation is the ability to do advanced conditions. Kind of coming back to this example here, rather than these basic conditions, I can also now go and create an advanced condition. And this is where the kind of point and click build that we have here isn't enough for you. We can now go off and write conditions using a language called JSONata. You have exactly the same setting about kind of having one or multiple alerts before the incident should be created. But you can now go off and write JSONata conditions to either have very detailed nesting of your condition sets, or you can also have arithmetic operations or data operations. So let's go through a couple of quick examples. So firstly, this editor tries to make it easy for you to write these kind of conditions. On the left-hand side, we have an example alert. You can paste a different alert in here to test what you're about to write. So let's grab an alert that represents an end user router being offline. So following that example we had earlier. And you can start with something quite simple. So let's go with something similar to what we do with the basic condition. So let's say resource.type, and we can see that it's auto-completing for us. So that helps us understand the format of the alert. In this case, equals end user router. And we can see that we've immediately got feedback that matches our example alert, and that helps us understand how to write those conditions. Of course, you can also chain on here as well. So you can do something like and alert.type.condition equals offline. So that's now going to match whenever we have an alert coming with a resource type of end user router, which we'll do here, and type.condition of offline. And you can make this a lot more complicated if you need to. That's a really simple example. And just to show you an example of a kind of much more complex condition, you could also write a rudimentary maintenance window kind of algorithm as part of this. So I'm going to copy and paste this in so you don't have to watch me type it all. But what this JSONata I just pasted is doing is it's defining a number of maintenance windows. So in this case, between midnight and 1 a.m. on this date, on the 20th of June, and between midnight and 1 a.m. on the 21st. And we've got some code here that's basically going through that list of maintenance windows and only raising an incident where the alert occurs outside of that window. So right now it's matching true because it's matching our type and condition, and it's not within one of those 2 maintenance windows. However, if I change this time so that it's got a first occurrence starting at midnight, then we can see that it's now matching as false because it's now falling within one of those windows and giving us that false condition. So you can do very simple things like we did previously, that's matching kind of what we did with the basic conditions, or you can go fairly advanced and start kind of encoding logic in those conditions as well. And as I mentioned earlier, JSONata is an industry standard language. There's quite detailed documentation, all the different things you can do with it. And it's also used elsewhere in the product. So it's used within some of the connector mappings and also some of the other policy types. So in summary, 2 new capabilities. Firstly, we can now match on alerts across a group before creating an incident, like that scenario we went through with those end user routers. And also you can use more advanced conditions through JSONata and incident creation where you can't express the criteria you need in those basic condition blocks.
Thanks a lot, Matt. That was really exciting. I loved it. Cool new feature. It reminds me a little bit of what the business rules of TBSM were doing in the past. This is something like that. Creating these kind of combinations, like traversing service trees, reminded me like that. So pretty cool feature. I like it. If you want to read through further stuff, there is, for one, the blog. Here is a link into it. This is written by Matt, and there's also lots of documentation about that. And if you want to go into the latest and greatest version of the documentation, you should choose 4.10.1. And we have here as a chapter, Promote Alerts to an Incident. In there, the documentation starts with traditional ways of using these kind of rule setting, but also going into the advanced stuff that has been introduced now. And with that, we're done for today. And I'd love to see you all together, healthy and up and happy, in the next AIOps video. And until then, have a great time. Bye.